My beloved child, there is something about your soulmate that has remained hidden behind ordinary conversations, familiar routines, and the carefully controlled version of themselves they show to the world. You may have noticed the pauses, the sudden changes in their tone, the moments when they seemed completely present with you and then strangely distant, as if one thought had entered their mind that they were determined not to reveal. You may have wondered why certain conversations never reached their natural ending, why they sometimes looked at you as though they were remembering something they had tried very hard to forget. But what you are about to hear changes the meaning of those moments. Your married soulmate has been carrying a secret that is not simply about what they feel today. It reaches backward into a decision they made, a truth they buried, and a realization that has become impossible for them to ignore. The most surprising part is that they did not expect this truth to return. They believed time would make it smaller. They believed distance would make it disappear. They believed that choosing a different path would eventually silence the question that kept returning to their heart. Yet something happened recently, something deeply personal, something they cannot easily explain away, and suddenly the life they carefully arranged began forcing them to look at the one truth they had avoided. And that truth has your presence written all over it. Before you assume you already know what this means, stay with the story, because the secret is not simply that they still think about you. That would be too easy. The real revelation is connected to why they never fully let go, why certain memories still affect them, and why their feelings became stronger precisely when they were trying hardest to suppress them. For a long time, your soulmate may have told themselves a story that sounded reasonable, that the past was the past, that circumstances had changed, that everyone eventually moves forward, and that some connections are simply meant to remain unfinished. They repeated that explanation until it almost sounded like truth. But then came the moments they could not explain. A song could suddenly bring back your voice. A familiar place could awaken a memory they had not visited in years. A simple sentence from someone else could remind them of something you once said, and for a few seconds, the life around them would become strangely quiet. They would remember how naturally they once spoke to you, how deeply understood they felt, and how certain conversations with you somehow reached places inside them that ordinary conversations never touched. And here is where the hidden part begins. Your soulmate has not only been remembering you. They have been comparing the person they became with the person they were when you were close. That comparison has forced them to recognize something uncomfortable but emotionally powerful. Somewhere along the way, they stopped asking what they truly wanted and started asking what would create the least disruption. They chose stability over uncertainty. They chose expectations over questions. They chose the path that looked understandable from the outside. But inside, one question remained untouched. What if I had been honest about what I felt? That question became the secret they carried. They did not tell everyone. They may not have even admitted it completely to themselves. Yet recently, something has changed. They have reached a point where pretending not to know the answer is becoming harder than facing it. And the reason this matters to you is because the revelation is not about a random memory. It is about the role you played in awakening something inside them that they never completely replaced. There is one detail, however, that makes this story far more intense than you might expect. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that the biggest secret was never merely that they had feelings for you. The bigger secret was the reason they hid those feelings. They were afraid that admitting what you meant to them would force them to question everything they had built afterward. So they buried the truth beneath responsibility, routine, silence, and the appearance of being completely certain about their choices. They learned how to continue living while carrying an unanswered emotional question. And perhaps you noticed that whenever the connection between you became emotionally significant, something seemed to interrupt it. Timing was wrong. Circumstances became complicated. Words remained unsaid. One person waited while the other stayed silent. Then life moved forward, but the emotional chapter never received a true ending. That is why the secret is finally approaching the surface now. Your soulmate has started realizing that an unfinished connection does not always disappear simply because people stop speaking about it. Sometimes silence preserves a truth instead of destroying it. And the revelation they are approaching may begin with something surprisingly simple. An admission to themselves that they never stopped wondering about you. Not necessarily because they have already decided what happens next, but because they can no longer honestly pretend that you meant nothing. There is a difference between remembering someone and realizing that the memory still carries emotional weight. Your soulmate is crossing that difference now. They are looking back at moments they once dismissed and seeing them differently. They are reconsidering words they once ignored. They are connecting details that seemed unrelated at the time. And one particular memory may soon become the key that unlocks everything they have been trying to keep hidden. But there is something even deeper waiting beyond that realization, and this is where the story takes its sharpest turn. Your soulmate has begun to recognize that the person they were when they met you was not imaginary. That version of themselves. The one who laughed more freely, dreamed more boldly, spoke more honestly, and felt understood without having to explain every emotion, still exists beneath everything they have accumulated since then. You may have thought the connection was about whether they would return, whether they would speak, or whether some dramatic moment would finally bring everything into the open. But the deeper revelation is about identity. Your presence became connected to a part of them they had deliberately placed in the background. And now that part is asking to be acknowledged. This does not mean every circumstance instantly changes. It means the internal story they have been living by is beginning to change, and that can be far more powerful than one sudden conversation. They are realizing that they cannot keep calling something insignificant when their own heart keeps bringing it back into focus. They cannot keep pretending they never wondered what your life became. They cannot keep dismissing the strange emotional reaction that appears whenever your name, your memory, or anything connected to you unexpectedly enters their world. Somewhere beneath the controlled exterior, a confession is forming, not necessarily the confession you expect, but one that could explain years of confusion with a single truth: I never completely understood why you stayed in my heart. And when that truth finally reaches the surface, you may discover that the secret was not created yesterday. It has been growing quietly for a very long time. The question now is not whether there was something real enough to remember. The question is what your soulmate will finally do after admitting to themselves that they have been carrying it all along. There is a moment your soulmate keeps replaying in their mind, and strangely, it is not the biggest or most dramatic moment you ever shared. It may have been an ordinary conversation, a quiet goodbye, a look that lasted slightly longer than it should have, or a sentence you said without realizing how deeply it would stay with them. At the time, they continued their life as though nothing important had happened. But now, when they revisit that memory, they see something they completely missed before. They realize you were giving them an opportunity to be honest, and they were too afraid, too uncertain, or too committed to the life they had already chosen to take it. That realization has become one of the hardest things for them to sit with. Because your soulmate is beginning to understand that sometimes people do not lose a meaningful connection because they stopped caring. Sometimes they lose it because they were afraid of what caring would require them to admit. And this is exactly where their biggest secret becomes more complicated. They have privately wondered whether their life would feel different if they had made one different choice when you were still close. They have imagined conversations that never happened. They have silently rewritten endings that were never properly spoken. They have wondered whether you ever looked back too. And whenever that thought appears, they quickly try to push it away. But lately, pushing it away has not worked. Something inside them has become tired of pretending that the question does not matter. Your soulmate is discovering that there is a difference between moving forward and truly being at peace with the past. They may have moved forward in life, but emotionally, one chapter remained open because they never gave themselves permission to understand what it meant. And now comes the part they would probably struggle to explain even if you were standing directly in front of them. Your soulmate has been noticing how often your memory appears at unexpected times, but what unsettles them most is what happens afterward. They do not simply remember you and move on. They become reflective. They start questioning old decisions. They think about the person they were then compared with the person they are now. They wonder whether they have been living according to their deepest feelings or according to what seemed easiest for everyone around them. This does not mean their current circumstances suddenly disappear, and it does not mean every emotion has a simple answer. It means they are finally looking at their own heart without immediately trying to silence it. And one realization keeps returning: you represented honesty to them. Around you, they could not hide behind the version of themselves they showed everyone else. You noticed things they tried to conceal. You understood pauses they never explained. You saw emotions they tried to disguise as indifference. That is why the connection became so difficult for them to forget. It was not simply about attraction or nostalgia. It was about being recognized. And being truly recognized can stay with someone long after circumstances change. Your soulmate may have spent years convincing themselves that they had successfully closed that chapter, but now they are realizing they never actually closed it. They simply stopped turning the page. There is another hidden layer that makes the coming revelation even more emotional. Your soulmate may have believed that you were the one who eventually forgot. They may have assumed that because you stopped reaching out, became quieter, or continued living your own life, you no longer carried the same feelings. That assumption protected them. If you had forgotten, then they could tell themselves that there was nothing left to confront. But somewhere inside, they have wondered whether your silence meant something completely different. Perhaps you were protecting your own heart. Perhaps you were waiting for clarity that never arrived. Perhaps you simply decided that you could not keep standing at a door that nobody was opening. And that possibility has begun affecting your soulmate more than they expected. Because suddenly, their silence does not feel neutral anymore. They are starting to understand that every time they chose not to speak, you may have interpreted that silence as an answer. Every time they hid their feelings, you may have believed there were none. Every time they acted as though everything was fine, they may have unknowingly taught you to let go. That realization carries weight. It forces them to confront the possibility that some of the distance they now regret was created by their own hesitation. And this is why the secret feels so close to being revealed. They are no longer only remembering what happened. They are beginning to understand their responsibility in what did not happen. That is a completely different realization, and once someone reaches that point, pretending becomes much harder. So listen carefully to this final piece, because your soulmate's biggest secret may not arrive as some dramatic declaration. It may begin quietly, with one honest sentence they have been afraid to say because saying it would make years of hidden emotion real. They may finally admit that they thought about you far more often than they ever allowed you to know. They may admit that certain parts of their life made them wonder about the path they did not take. They may admit that they sometimes searched for the emotional familiarity they experienced with you and could not understand why it was so difficult to recreate. But there is one confession deeper than all of those. They may finally admit that they never completely stopped wondering what could have happened if fear had not been involved. That is the secret beginning to rise. And once that truth is acknowledged, every old silence can be seen differently. Every unfinished conversation can carry a new meaning. Every moment you thought was insignificant can suddenly appear like a missing piece of a much larger story. Your soulmate is not simply discovering an old feeling. They are discovering why that feeling survived despite everything that happened afterward. And the closer they come to understanding that reason, the closer they come to a decision they have avoided for a very long time. The next revelation will not be about what they felt years ago. It will be about what they finally realize they can no longer keep hidden now. Something has shifted inside your soulmate, and the strange thing is that nobody around them may recognize it yet. They still carry on with ordinary conversations, ordinary responsibilities, and the familiar rhythm of their life, but underneath that surface, a private realization has begun changing the way they see everything. They have started revisiting the moments when your connection became difficult, and for the first time, they are not automatically blaming circumstances, timing, or distance. They are asking a much more uncomfortable question. What did I actually do to protect myself from feeling this deeply? That question has opened a door they kept locked for a very long time. Behind it are memories they thought they had already understood, your voice, your expressions, the things you noticed without being told, the conversations that ended too soon, and especially the moments when they wanted to say more but chose silence instead. Your soulmate is realizing that some of their strongest memories of you are attached to things that were never completed. The conversation that never happened. The explanation that never came. The goodbye that never truly felt like goodbye. And now they are seeing the pattern. Every time their heart moved toward honesty, their mind found a reason to step backward. Every time they considered revealing what you meant to them, another responsibility seemed more important. They convinced themselves they were being sensible. They told themselves that emotions could be managed. They believed that eventually the feeling would become just another memory. But now something has become impossible to ignore. The memory survived because the emotion underneath it was never properly understood. That is why your soulmate's secret is not simply returning. It is unfolding. What they are beginning to understand next is even more surprising. They have realized that they did not only hide their feelings from you, they hid them from themselves. That distinction matters. Because whenever your memory appeared, they could always find a logical explanation for why it happened. Maybe they were simply nostalgic. Maybe they were remembering an old chapter. Maybe they were curious about how you were doing. Maybe everyone occasionally thinks about someone from the past. Those explanations allowed them to remain comfortable. But then there were moments when the reaction was far stronger than simple nostalgia. A memory could change their mood. A familiar phrase could make them stop and think. A place connected to you could suddenly feel different. And recently, they have started noticing these reactions instead of dismissing them. They are asking why one person from their past can still create such a powerful emotional response while so many other memories have faded naturally. That question is bringing them toward an answer they never wanted to face. Your connection reached a part of them that they never fully replaced. Again, this does not mean their current life has no meaning. It means something unresolved has existed alongside it. Your soulmate may have continued building their world, fulfilling responsibilities, and becoming someone different, but somewhere beneath all of that, there remained a version of themselves that remembered how it felt to be completely understood by you. And now that memory is becoming impossible to keep buried. The secret is no longer just, "I remember you." It is becoming, "I finally understand why I never stopped remembering you." Then comes the moment that may explain why everything feels different now. Your soulmate has begun imagining what would happen if you suddenly stood in front of them and asked one direct question: "Why did you never tell me the truth?" That question frightens them because they know the answer would not be simple. They could talk about timing. They could talk about circumstances. They could talk about responsibilities and choices. But beneath every explanation would remain the truth they have spent years avoiding. They were afraid of what honesty might change. They feared that once they admitted how deeply they cared, there would be no easy way to return to the life they already understood. So they chose silence. And silence became a habit. The habit became distance. The distance became a story they told themselves about why the connection was never meant to become anything more. But now they are questioning that story. They are wondering whether "it was not meant to happen" was actually destiny, or simply the sentence they used because they did not have the courage to face what they felt. That realization is powerful because it changes how they interpret the past. They are no longer looking at you as someone they simply lost contact with. They are looking at you as someone connected to a choice they never fully made. And that is why their emotions have become more complicated lately. It is not only longing. It is curiosity, regret, tenderness, confusion, and the desire to finally understand what remained unfinished. They may even wonder whether you ever realized how much they were holding back. They may wonder whether you mistook their silence for indifference. And the thought that you might have walked away believing they never cared may be one of the hardest things for them to accept. Now the hidden truth moves closer to the surface, because your soulmate is beginning to realize something they never expected to admit. Part of them has been waiting for permission to be honest. Not permission from other people. Permission from themselves. For years, they may have believed that because life moved forward, they had no right to revisit old emotions. They may have convinced themselves that acknowledging the connection would be unfair, complicated, or unnecessary. But emotions do not always disappear simply because someone decides they should. Sometimes they become quieter until one moment, one memory, or one unexpected realization brings them back into focus. And when that happens, the person is forced to choose between denial and honesty. Your soulmate appears to be approaching that crossroads emotionally. They are asking themselves what they would say if there were no fear of judgment, no pressure to appear certain, and no need to protect the image they have created. And beneath all those layers, one confession keeps forming: you mattered more than I ever allowed myself to admit. That sentence could explain why they still remember specific details about you. It could explain why certain memories remain unusually vivid. It could explain why they sometimes wonder how different their life might have felt if they had been more honest when it mattered. And perhaps most importantly, it could explain why this secret is finally becoming impossible for them to keep contained. Because the longer they avoid the truth, the louder the unanswered question becomes. What if you were never simply a chapter they were supposed to forget? What if you were the person who showed them something about themselves that they have been trying to understand ever since? That is the revelation now taking shape, and the next layer of their secret may expose the one thing they have never been brave enough to say about the moment they realized losing your connection affected them far more than they expected.